Sergeant Daniel Carter had never been so bored in his entire military career, and he had spent 3 weeks once guarding a supply depot on a moon where nothing ever happened. So that was saying something. He stood at the edge of the Grand Hall on Kithra Prime, watching diplomats from Earth and the Valorian Empire exchange polite words that meant nothing. And he wondered why they needed armed soldiers here when everyone was supposed to be making peace. War between humans and Valorians had lasted 3 years, and thousands had died on both sides, but now the politicians had decided it was time to talk instead of fight, which Daniel supposed was a good thing, even if it meant he had to stand still for hours wearing his dress uniform. He glanced across the room and noticed a Valorian princess for the first time that day, and something about her caught his attention in a way he could not explain. Princess Valithra Siren was younger than most of the Valorian delegation, with silver-blue skin that seemed to glow faintly in the light and violet eyes that held a sadness Daniel recognized from looking in mirrors. After bad missions, she stood apart from the others, watching the proceedings with an expression that suggested she found this as tedious as he did. And for a moment, their eyes met across the crowded hall. Daniel looked away quickly, because staring at foreign royalty was probably not part of his job description. And Lieutenant Commander Nathan Brooks would definitely have something to say about it if he noticed the explosion came without warning. One moment Daniel was thinking about how much he wanted a cup of coffee, and the next moment the world turned into fire and screaming and chaos. And his training took over before his mind could catch up. He hit the ground and rolled behind a pillar, his hand finding his sidearm automatically. And through the smoke he could see figures in dark armor pouring through the shattered windows. These were not Valorians, and they were not human either, and Daniel recognized the angular helmets of the Dralith Confederacy, a faction that had been selling weapons to both sides throughout the war. They were here to make sure the peace talks failed, and they were killing everyone they could find. Daniel moved through the smoke, firing at the attackers, and he saw other coalition soldiers doing the same, while Valorian guards fought with their curved energy blades. The battle was brutal and fast, and within minutes the Dralith attackers were dead or dying. But the damage was done. Ambassador Claire Dawson was calling for medics, and Daniel could hear Nathan Brooks shouting orders, and then he heard something else. A Valorian guard crying out in a language Daniel did not understand, but in a tone of pure grief, ran toward the sound and found Lord Kethis, the commander of the Royal Guard, kneeling beside a fallen figure. And Daniel's heart dropped when he recognized the silver-blue skin and violet eyes princess. Valithra lay in a pool of copper-colored blood, her chest torn open by shrapnel, and her eyes were fluttering as she struggled to breathe. Daniel pushed past Lord Kethis and dropped to his knees beside her, his medic training taking over as he assessed the damage. And what he saw made his stomach turn. The wounds were bad, but that was not the worst part, because the princess was bleeding far too fast, her blood refusing to clot the way it should. And Daniel realized she must have some kind of condition that prevented her body from healing itself. Her blood will not stop, Lord Kethis said, his voice breaking. She has the royal sickness, and our medical supplies were destroyed in the attack, and there is nothing we can do. Daniel looked at the dying princess, and he looked at the chaos around them, and he knew that by the time they got Valorian medical supplies from the ships in orbit, she would be dead. He thought about the xenobiology courses he had taken, and he thought about the research papers he had read during the war about Valorian physiology, and a crazy idea formed in his mind. Human blood and Valorian blood were not the same, but they shared certain proteins, certain structures that were similar enough that maybe, just maybe, human blood could help stabilize her until proper treatment arrived. It was a theory that had never been tested, and it could kill her faster, and it could kill him too. But she was dying anyway, and Daniel had never been able to watch someone die when there was even the smallest chance he could save them. he pulled out his emergency medical kit and found the transfusion equipment. And Lord Kethis grabbed his arm with a grip like iron. "What are you doing, human?" "I am going to give her my blood," Daniel said. "It might save her, or it might not. But if I do nothing, she will definitely die, so I have to try." Lord Kethis stared at him with an expression Daniel could not read, and then slowly released his arm. And Daniel got to work. He found a vein in his own arm and connected the tube. Then found a vein in the princess's arm and made the connection. And he squeezed the pump that would push his blood into her dying body. Nathan Brooks appeared out of the smoke and saw what Daniel was doing, and his face went pale with shock. "Carter, what the hell are you doing? Stop that right now. That is an order." "With respect, sir, I cannot do that," Daniel said, watching the red human blood flow through the tube and into the princess. "If I stop now, she dies, and I am not going to let that happen. You could be killing her. You could be killing yourself. And do you have any idea what kind of diplomatic incident this will cause?" "I do not care about diplomats," Daniel said, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. "I care about saving lives, and that is what I am doing." The seconds stretched into minutes as Daniel's blood flowed into Princess Valithra, and he could feel himself growing lightheaded from the loss. But he did not stop. Her bleeding began to slow, and that was a good sign. But her eyes had closed, and her breathing had become shallow. And Daniel was starting to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. Then her heart stopped. Daniel felt it through the connection between them. A sudden absence where there had been a faint rhythm. And for one horrible moment, he thought he had failed. Lord Kethis made a sound of pure grief. And Nathan Brooks put a hand on Daniel's shoulder, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Princess Valithra's heart beat again. It was weak at first, but it grew stronger with each passing second. And her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at Daniel with an expression of absolute wonder. She whispered something in Valorian, a single word that made Lord Kethis gasp in shock. And then her eyes closed again as she fell into unconscious sleep. "What did she say?" Daniel asked. His voice weak from blood loss. Lord Kethis looked at him with an expression that mixed confusion and awe and something that might have been fear. "She said a word that has not been spoken by our people in 1,000 years. The Valorian Guard commander said. She called you her soulbound, and I do not know what that means. But I think both of your lives just changed forever." Daniel looked down at the princess, still connected to him by a thin tube of mingled blood. And he had a feeling that Lord Kethis was right. He had saved her life. But something told him this was only the beginning of their story. 3 days had passed since the attack on Cathar Prime, and Daniel Carter found himself confined to quarters aboard the Coalition flagship Resolute, waiting to find out if he would be praised as a hero or court-martialed as a fool. He sat on the edge of his bunk and stared at the wall, thinking about the princess and wondering if she was still alive, because no one would tell him anything, and the waiting was driving him crazy. A knock came at his door, and he expected it to be Nathan Brooks with news about his fate. But when the door opened, he saw Ambassador Claire Dawson standing there with a troubled expression on her face. "Sergeant Carter, we need to talk about what you did," she said, stepping into his small quarters and looking around as if she expected to find something suspicious. "Is the princess alive?" Daniel asked, because that was the only thing he really cared about. She is alive. "And that is part of the problem," the ambassador said. "The Valorian physicians have examined her, and they have discovered something unprecedented, something that is causing a great deal of confusion on both sides." Daniel waited for her to continue, and the ambassador took a deep breath before speaking again. "Your blood did not just save her life, Sergeant. It bonded with her own blood at a cellular level in a way that Valorian science cannot explain. And according to their culture, this has created something called a soul binding between you." Daniel had heard Lord Kethis mention that word, but he still did not understand what it meant. "What exactly is a soul binding?" he asked. "According to Valorian history, it is an ancient ritual that was once used by their royalty to choose life partners," Ambassador Dawson explained. One person would sacrifice something of themselves to save the other. And if the bond formed, it meant their souls were compatible in a way that transcended physical form. "But I am not Valorian," Daniel said, stating the obvious. "How can I be soul-bound to her?" That is what everyone is trying to figure out, and in the meantime, we have a very serious diplomatic situation on our hands, because the princess is refusing to leave your side. Daniel blinked in confusion, and the ambassador pointed toward the door of his quarters. "She has been standing outside that door for the past 6 hours, Sergeant, and when the guards tried to move her, she invoked some kind of ancient royal privilege. And now no one knows what to do." Daniel stood up and walked to the door, and when it opened, he saw Princess Valithra standing there in elegant robes of silver and blue. Her violet eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his heart race. She looked different than she had in the grand hall. Stronger somehow, despite the bandages still visible beneath her clothing. And there was a light in her eyes that had not been there before. "You are Daniel Carter," she said. And her voice was like music, even though she spoke in accented English. "You gave me your blood without hesitation, without knowing if it would kill you, and I need to understand why." "Because you were dying," Daniel said simply, "and I could not just stand there and watch." The princess studied his face for a long moment, and then she smiled. And it transformed her features from beautiful to radiant. "I can feel your heartbeat," she said softly. "Even when we are rooms apart, I can sense it inside my own chest. And I know when you are afraid, and when you are lying, and when you are being kind. And I have never felt so connected to another living being in my entire existence." Daniel did not know what to say to that, because he had started to notice something similar. A strange awareness of her presence that had been growing since he woke up in the medical bay. "The bond works both ways," he said. And it was not a question. "Yes," the princess confirmed. "We are tied together now, Daniel Carter, and I do not know what that means for either of us. But I know that I cannot simply walk away and pretend it did not happen." Ambassador Dawson cleared her throat nervously, and Daniel remembered they were not alone. "Your Highness, while I appreciate the significance of what has occurred, we need to find a solution that satisfies both human and Valorian authorities. And having you camp outside a sergeant's quarters is causing considerable concern." Before Valithra could respond, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Lord Kethis appeared with several Valorian guards behind him. His expression was thunderous as he looked at Daniel, and his hand rested on the hilt of his energy blade. "Human," he said, his voice cold with barely contained fury. "You have claimed the princess through blood ritual, and by the ancient laws of our people, that gives me the right to challenge you for her honor." "I did not claim anyone," Daniel protested. "I just tried to save her life." "Your intentions do not matter," Lord Kethis replied. "The bond exists, and it cannot be undone, and therefore I challenge you to single combat to prove you are worthy of what you have taken." Princess Valithra stepped between them before Daniel could respond, and her violet eyes blazed with an anger he could feel through their connection. "You will do no such thing." "Kethis," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "This man saved my life when everyone else had given up hope. And I will honor him as our culture demands, and you will respect my decision." Lord Kethis stared at her in shock, and the other Valorian guards exchanged uncertain glances. "Your Highness, surely you cannot mean to accept this human as your soulbound. Your father will never allow it." "My father taught me to honor those who show true courage," Valithra replied. And Daniel Carter showed more courage in that moment than any warrior I have ever known. And I will not let you harm him for doing what was right. The tension in the corridor was thick enough to cut with a knife. and Daniel could feel Valithra's emotions through their bond. Her determination and her fear and her desperate hope that she was making the right choice. Finally, Lord Kethis lowered his hand from his blade and bowed his head in submission. "As you command, Your Highness, but I still do not trust this human, and I will be watching him closely." "Then watch," Valithra said, "and perhaps you will learn something about the people we have been fighting for 3 years." Lord Kethis turned and walked away with his guards. And Ambassador Dawson let out a breath she had been holding. "Well, that could have gone worse," she said weakly. "But we still have a major problem. Because Emperor Mordaxus has just arrived at Kethra Prime, and he wants to meet the human who shares blood with his daughter." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine, because even he knew that the Valorian Emperor was not someone to be taken lightly. Princess Valithra took his hand, and through their bond, he felt her reassurance mixed with her own nervousness. "Do not be afraid," she said. "My father is stern, but he is fair, and he will judge you by your actions, not your species." Daniel looked at the princess, who had become connected to him in ways he still did not understand, and he realized that his life would never be the same. "I guess I should probably change into a clean uniform," he said. And despite everything, Valithra laughed, and the sound made his heart feel lighter than it had in days. The Valorian Imperial cruiser Eternal Light was the largest ship Daniel had ever seen, and as the shuttle carried him toward its massive docking bay, he could not help but feel like a small fish swimming toward a very big shark. Princess Valithra sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture of comfort. And through their bond, he could sense that she was nervous too, even though her face remained calm. "My father can be intimidating," she said quietly. "But remember that you saved my life, and nothing can change that truth." Daniel nodded but said nothing, because his mouth had gone dry, and his heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could feel it through their connection. The shuttle docked, and the doors opened, and Daniel stepped out into a corridor of gleaming silver walls and soft blue lights that made everything look otherworldly, and strange Valorian guards escorted them through the ship. And every single one of them looked at Daniel with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. And he kept his eyes forward and his back straight, because showing fear would only make things worse. They entered a massive chamber that could only be the throne room. And at the far end sat Emperor Mordaxus on a throne, carved from what looked like a single piece of crystal. The Emperor was ancient by any measure, his silver-blue skin marked with intricate patterns that Daniel assumed indicated his age and rank, and his violet eyes held a weight of centuries as they fixed upon the human soldier. "Come forward," the Emperor commanded, and his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. Daniel walked toward the throne with Valithra beside him, and he stopped at a respectful distance and stood at attention like the soldier he was. "So you are the human who gave his blood to my daughter," Emperor Mordaxus said, studying Daniel with an intensity that made him feel like every secret he had ever kept was being read like an open book. "Yes, Your Majesty," Daniel replied, keeping his voice steady through sheer force of will. "The physicians tell me that what you did should have been impossible," the Emperor continued. "They tell me that human blood and Valorian blood should not be compatible. And yet here my daughter stands alive and stronger than she has ever been, with your blood running through her veins." "I did not know if it would work," Daniel admitted, "but she was dying and there was no other option, and I could not just watch her die without trying something." The Emperor leaned forward on his throne, and his ancient eyes seemed to pierce through Daniel's soul. "Let me ask you a question, human, and I want you to answer honestly, because I will know if you lie. Would you take back what you did if you could, knowing all the complications it has caused?" Daniel thought about the question carefully, because he understood that his answer might determine his fate. He thought about the political chaos and the near duel with Lord Kethis and the fact that his military career might be over. And he thought about the princess beside him and the strange bond that connected them. "No, Your Majesty," he said finally, "I would make the same choice 1,000 times. Because a life is a life regardless of species. And I was not raised to stand by while someone dies if there is anything I can do to help." The Emperor was silent for a long moment, and Daniel could feel Valithra's tension through their bond as she waited for her father's judgment. Then, Emperor Mordaxus smiled. And it was like watching a mountain suddenly decide to be friendly. "You remind me of a Valorian warrior I knew long ago," the Emperor said. He too believed that doing what was right mattered more than doing what was safe. And that belief cost him his life, but earned him eternal honor. He stood from his throne and walked toward Daniel, and up close he was even more imposing. Towering over the human by nearly 2 feet, "I grant you the status of Friend of the Throne," the Emperor declared. "This means you are under my personal protection, and no one from either side may prosecute you for your actions. And it means I consider you worthy of the bond you share with my daughter." Daniel felt relief wash through him, and through their connection, he felt Valithra's joy as well. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said, bowing his head in respect. The Emperor placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, and his grip was surprisingly gentle. "Do not thank me yet, young human. Because being worthy of something and understanding it are 2 different things. And you have much to learn about what you have become." Later, after the formal audience was over, Valithra found Daniel standing on an observation deck, watching the stars through a massive window. "You impressed him," she said. "Coming to stand beside him, I could tell. And my father is not easily impressed." "He asked a good question," Daniel replied, "about whether I would take it back, and the truth is, I never even considered it." Valithra was quiet for a moment, and Daniel could feel something through their bond. A mix of gratitude and something deeper that she was hesitant to express. "There is something I need to tell you," she said finally. "Something I have not told anyone else." She turned to face him, and her violet eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Before the attack, I had accepted that I was going to die young, because the royal sickness has no cure, and I was getting weaker every year. And I had made peace with having a short life." Daniel felt his heart ache at the pain in her voice, and he reached out to take her hand. "But something has changed," Valithra continued. "The physicians cannot explain it, but your blood did something to my cells. Something that is making them regenerate in ways that should not be possible." She squeezed his hand and smiled through her tears. "You did not just save my life, Daniel Carter. You may have cured me of something that has killed every member of my family who was born with it. And I do not know how to thank you for that." "You do not have to thank me," Daniel said. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Valithra said firmly. "That is not true. Because I saw the others in that hall, and none of them thought to do what you did. And none of them would have risked their own life for a stranger from an enemy species." Before Daniel could respond, a Valorian officer burst onto the observation deck with urgent news. "Your Highness, the intelligence division has made a discovery about the attack, and the Emperor needs to see you immediately." They hurried to the command center where Emperor Mordaxus was studying holographic displays with a grim expression. The Dralith attack was not random, the Emperor said as they entered. They had specific targets, and the primary target was you, Valithra. Daniel felt Valithra's shock through their bond, followed quickly by fear and then anger. "Someone wanted me dead specifically," she asked. "Who would gain from my death?" The intelligence officer brought up another display showing financial records and communication logs. "Someone within the Valorian court paid the Dralith to target you, Your Highness, and we are still tracing the source. But we believe they feared your diplomatic work would end the war before they could achieve their own goals." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what this meant. Someone was still out there, someone who wanted Valithra dead. And if the bond between them worked both ways, then killing Daniel might be a way to kill her too, as if in answer to his thoughts. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Intruder alert. The announcement system called Intruder Alert in Section 7. Section 7 was exactly where Daniel's quarters had been assigned. Someone had just tried to kill him, and the fight was far from over. Daniel ran through the corridors of the Eternal Light, with Valorian guards on either side of him. And alarms continued to blare as the ship went into lockdown. The intruder had been found in Section 7 trying to plant an explosive device in Daniel's quarters. And if Daniel had been there instead of meeting with the Emperor, he would certainly be dead. Princess Valithra had insisted on coming despite the danger, and Daniel could feel her determination through their bond. A fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. The intruder escaped into the maintenance tunnels, a guard reported. We are sealing all exits, but there are hundreds of access points. Then we search them all, Valithra commanded. And her voice rang with authority that made even the veteran gods snap to attention. They split into search teams, and Daniel found himself paired with Lord Kethis, which was awkward considering the Valorian Guard commander had tried to challenge him to a duel just days earlier. You are surprisingly calm for someone who was almost killed, Lord Kethis observed as they moved through a narrow maintenance corridor. I have been almost killed before, Daniel replied. It comes with the job. Lord Kethis made a sound that might have been amusement or contempt. Daniel could not tell which. I still do not understand you humans, the Valorian said. You are so fragile and your lives are so short. Yet you throw yourselves into danger without hesitation, and it makes no sense to me. Maybe that is exactly why we do it, Daniel said. Because our lives are short, we have to make every moment count, and we cannot waste time being afraid. Lord Kethis was quiet for a long moment as they continued their search. Perhaps I have misjudged your species, he said finally. The princess certainly seems to think you are worthy of respect, as she is rarely wrong about such things. Before Daniel could respond, he felt a sudden spike of fear through his bond with Valithra, and he knew with absolute certainty that she was in danger. This way, he said, and he took off running without waiting for Lord Kethis to follow. He navigated through the tunnels by instinct, following the pull of the bond like a compass pointing toward its true north. And he could feel Valithra getting closer with every step. Burst through a hatch and found himself in a cargo bay where Valithra stood facing a figure in dark armor. And the figure had a weapon pointed directly at the princess's heart. One more step and she dies, the figure warned. And the voice was female and Valorian, and somehow familiar. Valithra's face was pale, but her expression was calm. And through their bond, Daniel felt her fear mingled with a strange sadness. Take off your helmet, sister, Valithra said quietly. We both know who you are. The figure hesitated, then reached up and removed the helmet to reveal a face similar to Valithra's, but older and harder, with violet eyes that burned with hatred. Crown Princess Morithra, Lord Kethis gasped as he arrived behind Daniel. This cannot be. You are supposed to be at the capital. I go where I please, Morithra replied coldly, and I please to see my little sister dead along with her human pet. Why? Valithra asked, and her voice was thick with grief. We are family, Morithra. How could you do this? Morithra laughed, and it was an ugly sound without any warmth, because you are ruining everything with your precious peace talks. And if this war ends, our empire will stagnate and weaken, and I need the glory of conquest to secure my claim to the throne. So you hired assassins to kill your own sister, Daniel said, his voice hard with anger. Just for political power? You do not get to judge me, human, Morithra spat. You are nothing but an inferior creature from a primitive world. And the fact that my sister has bonded herself to you is an embarrassment to our entire species. She raised her weapon higher, and Daniel could see her finger tightening on the trigger. He moved without thinking, throwing himself between Marithra and Valithra just as the weapon fired. The energy bolt hit him in the shoulder and sent him spinning to the ground. And pain exploded through his body like nothing he had ever felt before, but he had given Lord Kethis the opening he needed. And the guard commander moved with blinding speed, disarming Marithra and forcing her to her knees before she could fire again. Valithra dropped to her knees beside Daniel, and he could feel her terror through their bond as she pressed her hands against his wound. "You fool!" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "You could have been killed." "Worth it," Daniel managed to say through the pain. "Had to protect you." Valorian medics arrived and began treating his wound. And through the haze of pain, Daniel heard Marithra screaming threats and promises of revenge. Lord Kethis stood over the fallen crown princess with his blade drawn, and his expression was grim. "Crown Princess Marithra, you are under arrest for treason against the throne and attempted murder of a member of the royal family. And may the ancestors have mercy on your soul, because I certainly do not." Hours later, Daniel lay in the medical bay with his shoulder bandaged, and Valithra sitting beside his bed, refusing to leave. "The physicians say you will make a full recovery," she told him, "though they are amazed that you survived at all, because Valorian weapons are designed to be lethal to most species." "I guess humans are tougher than we look," Daniel said, with a weak smile. Valithra shook her head in wonder, and through their bond, he felt her emotions. Gratitude and fear, and something warmer that she was still hesitant to name. "You took a blast meant for me," she said, "even knowing it could kill you. And I felt your choice through our bond, Daniel. I felt you decide that my life was worth more than your own." "It was not a calculation," Daniel replied. "I just could not let you get hurt, and my body moved before my mind could catch up." Lord Kethis entered the medical bay, and his expression was thoughtful as he looked at Daniel. "I owe you an apology." "Human," he said, and the words seemed to cost him great effort. "You have proven yourself today in a way that I cannot deny, and I was wrong to judge you before knowing your heart." Daniel nodded in acceptance, and Lord Kethis turned to address both of them. "Marithra has been taken into custody, and the Emperor is handling the situation. And with her confession, the peace negotiations can resume without further interference." "What will happen to her?" Valithra asked. And Daniel could feel her conflicted emotions about her treacherous sister. "That is for the Emperor to decide," Lord Kethis replied. "But her crimes are grave, and the law is clear." After he left, Valithra was quiet for a long time, and Daniel let her process her feelings without interruption. "I could have killed her," Valithra finally said. "When you went down, I felt such rage that I could have torn her apart with my bare hands, and that frightens me." "But you did not," Daniel pointed out. "You held back and let justice take its course, and that is what separates people like us from people like her." Valithra looked at him with wonder in her violet eyes. "You humans have an interesting philosophy about revenge," she said. "We have learned the hard way that vengeance only breeds more vengeance," Daniel replied. "And mercy, even when it is not deserved, can break the cycle and create something better." Valithra took his hand and held it gently, careful of his injured shoulder. "I have so much to learn from your people," she said, "and I hope I have time to learn it." Daniel smiled and squeezed her hand. "I think we have plenty of time," he said, and through their bond he felt her hope rise to match his own. 6 months had passed since the peace treaty was signed between the United Earth Coalition and the Valorian Empire, and the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of the U.S. Harmony, the first ship in history to be crewed by both humans and Valorians, and he still could not quite believe this was his life. Now, he had been offered the position of first human liaison to the Valorian royal court, a fancy title that basically meant he was the bridge between two civilizations that were still learning to trust each other. More importantly, it meant he got to stay with Valithra, And that had been the easiest decision he had ever made. The princess appeared beside him as if summoned by his thoughts, and her violet eyes sparkled with amusement as she felt his emotions through their bond. "You are feeling sentimental again," she teased. "I can tell because you get this particular warm feeling in your chest whenever you think about how much has changed." "Can you blame me?" Daniel replied, gesturing at the view screen that showed human and Valorian ships flying in formation. "A year ago, we were enemies trying to kill each other. And now we are partners in the first joint fleet the galaxy has ever seen." Valithra took his hand and stood beside him. And through their bond, he felt her own wonder at what they had built together. "The Emperor says you are the reason this happened," she said. "He believes your act of sacrifice that day showed our people that humans are capable of the same nobility we value in ourselves." "I just did what felt right," Daniel said, as he always did when anyone tried to give him credit. "And that is exactly why you are special," Valithra replied. "Because doing what feels right comes so naturally to you that you do not even realize how rare it is." An alarm interrupted their moment, and the bridge crew snapped to attention as sensor readings flooded the screens. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. The tactical officer reported. "Configuration matches Dralith Confederacy warships. Count is 47 and rising." Daniel felt his combat instincts kick in as he studied the tactical display. And beside him, Valithra's expression hardened into the face of a warrior princess. Ready for battle, the Dralith had been quiet since their assassination attempt failed. But intelligence reports had warned they were gathering forces for a major strike. Apparently, they had decided that the new alliance between humans and Valorians was too dangerous to let exist. And they had come to destroy it before it could grow any stronger. All ships. Battle stations. Admiral Nathan Brooks commanded over the fleet channel. And Daniel smiled to see his old commanding officer leading the combined force of Valithra was already moving to the communication console to coordinate with the Valorian ships in the fleet. All Valorian vessels. "This is Princess Valithra Saren. Form up according to Joint Tactical Plan Gamma and prepare for coordinated strike." Daniel watched in amazement as human and Valorian ships moved together like a single organism, each one knowing exactly where to go and what to do because they had trained together for months. Through his bond with Valithra, he could sense the Valorian ships and their crews, and he realized that she was using their connection to help coordinate the battle in ways that should have been impossible. The Dralith are focusing their attack on the Harmony, the tactical officer reported. "They must know this ship is the symbol of our alliance. Then let us show them what that symbol means," Daniel said, and he turned to the weapons officer. "Target their lead ships and fire everything we have." The Harmony shuddered as it unleashed a devastating barrage. A combination of human missiles and Valorian energy weapons that had been designed to work together. Dralth ships exploded under the assault, but more kept coming, and the battle became a chaos of fire and movement and desperate maneuvers, Daniel felt. Valithra's exhaustion through their bond as she continued to coordinate the Valorian forces, and he sent her strength in return, the two of them working together as naturally as breathing. "The Dralith flagship is making a run at us," the tactical officer warned. "They're going to try to ram." Daniel looked at the massive Dralith warship bearing down on them, and he knew they did not have time to get out of the way. But Valithra was already ahead of him, and through their bond he felt her reach out to every Valorian ship in the fleet. All Valorian vessels. "Focus fire on the enemy flagship. Maximum power now." The Valorian ships responded as one, and dozens of energy beams converged on the Dralith flagship at the same moment. The enemy ship exploded in a blinding flash. Close enough that the Harmony shook from the shockwave, but far enough that they survived with their flagship destroyed and their fleet in chaos. The remaining Dralith ships began to retreat, and the Allied fleet let them go. There was no need for more death today. And mercy was a lesson both humans and Valorians had learned to value hours later. When the victory celebrations had finally died down, Daniel and Valithra stood together on an observation deck watching the stars. "We did it," Valithra said softly. "Humans and Valorians fought together and won, and the galaxy will never be the same." Daniel put his arm around her, and through their bond, he felt her contentment and her hope for the future. "I have been thinking about what the Emperor said," he admitted, "about me being the reason all this happened, and I am not sure I agree with him." "Oh," Valithra asked, turning to look at him with curiosity. "It was not just me," Daniel explained. "It was you deciding to honor the bond instead of rejecting it. And it was Lord Kethis learning to respect humans. And it was every person on both sides who chose to give peace a chance." He turned to face her fully and took both her hands in his. "What happened between us was the spark. But the fire only grew because everyone chose to feed it instead of putting it out. And that is what gives me hope for the future." Valithra smiled, and through their bond Daniel felt her love for him, fully expressed at last without hesitation or doubt. "When I was dying on that floor," she said, "I had accepted my fate, and I thought my story was over. But you refused to let me go." She reached up and touched his face gently. "Do you ever regret it, Daniel, knowing how complicated your life has become because of that choice?" Daniel laughed and pulled her closer. "I would make the same choice 1,000 times, he said, echoing the words he had spoken to her father months ago. "Because that choice gave me you, and that is worth any complication." Valithra kissed him then, and through their bond, Daniel felt their hearts beating in perfect synchronization in a galaxy full of billions of stars and countless species. Two people from different worlds had found each other through an act of desperate compassion, and as they stood together, watching the ships of two allied nations flying side by side, Daniel knew that this was just the beginning. The universe was vast and full of dangers. But as long as there were people willing to reach across the divide and say, "Your life matters to me," there was hope. He had given his blood to save a dying princess, and she had refused to leave his side. Now they would face the future together, bound not just by blood, but by choice. And that was the most powerful bond of all. The stars look different when you are not facing them alone, Valithra said softly. Daniel smiled and held her close. "That is the human secret," he replied. "We figured out a long time ago that everything is better when you have someone to share it with." Valithra laughed, and the sound was like music. And through their bond, Daniel felt her joy matching his own. They stood there together as the stars wheeled overhead, two hearts beating as one. Proof that the greatest strength in the universe was not found in weapons or fleetsit, was found in the courage to reach out to a stranger and say 3 simple words, "I choose you." And that was a power no enemy could ever defeat.